My name is Liana. I'm 26 now, but when this story truly began, I was 17, just old enough to feel the walls of my father's house press against my ribs like a too-tight corset. He always said it was his roof, his money, his blood, and therefore, so was I. I remember sitting in my small room with the peeling wallpaper, pale blue with little white flowers, pretending to study while his voice carried through the thin walls. He didn't bother lowering it. Without me, she's nothing. She's too soft, too stupid. She'd starve in a week. Those words buried themselves into my chest like nails. At first, they made me feel small. Helpless. He'd remind me every time I asked for something: bus money, shampoo, new shoes when the old ones fell apart. You think this grows on trees? You think you'd have any of this without me? He liked to remind me I was his burden, but he also liked to remind me I was proof of his power. His investment. His possession. My mother was already long gone by then. She left when I was 9, or maybe 10, the exact year is a blur, but I remember the way the front door slammed shut. I remember staring at her coffee mug still on the table, a lipstick stain on the rim. She'd whispered goodbye in my hair, told me she was sorry, but not sorry enough to stay. So it was just him and me. My father, Vadim. And me, Liana, his living proof that he was a man worth fearing, worth respecting, worth feeding. He worked as a foreman on a construction site. He was proud of that. He'd come home with the smell of cement dust clinging to his coat, and when he was in a good mood he'd throw coins on the table, tell me to go get myself a pastry or something sweet. But good moods were rare. Most days, he'd drink in the kitchen and tell me about his day like it was my fault that the concrete was cheap, the workers lazy, the boss stingy. At school, I barely spoke. I did my homework, I kept my head down. Sometimes my teachers said I was sweet, but timid. Sometimes they said, you could do more, Liana, if you'd just believe in yourself. I nodded, but inside I heard only his voice: you'll never make it. You'll come crawling back. The truth was, I didn't know what making it even looked like. I didn't have friends with rich parents or big plans. I didn't dream of universities in far-off cities. I just dreamed of somewhere else. Somewhere with a locked door that only I had the key to. Somewhere my father's voice couldn't reach. At 17, that dream felt impossible, until one morning, I found a flyer on the bus seat next to me. Hairdressing courses, no experience needed. I don't know why I picked it up. I wasn't the kind of girl who did her hair. My nails were always bitten to the quick. But I folded that flyer into my pocket like it was a secret. That night, I lay in bed with my headphones in, listening to the silence between the songs. I imagined a pair of scissors in my hand. The sound they'd make snipping through hair, crisp, clean. I imagined touching someone's head gently, transforming it strand by strand. It seemed so simple. So small. But it was mine. When I told my father, he laughed. He laughed so hard he had to wipe his eyes. A hairdresser, he barked. You think people are going to pay you to play with hair? You can't even take care of yourself. You'll come back here crying when you can't pay rent. And I'll be waiting, remember that. So I did. I remembered. I remembered when I found a tiny room to rent, barely bigger than a closet, in the back of an old lady's apartment. I remembered when I used my lunch money to pay for evening classes. I remembered when I packed my clothes in 2 garbage bags while he was at work, left my key on the table, and closed the door behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't leave a note. I just left. The first months were the hardest. My room had no lock, just a curtain that I pulled across the doorway for privacy. I kept my scissors under my pillow, not because I thought anyone would hurt me, but because they were my anchor. Every day after classes, I swept floors in a local salon for tips, begged for practice heads from older students, and cut hair for free in the laundry room for the other girls who lived in the building. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie on my narrow bed and hear my father's voice in my head: you'll come crawling back. I almost believed him. Almost. Then one night, I cut the hair of a woman named Sveta, a real estate agent who liked my work so much she told her clients about me. Word spread. I got better scissors. Better clients. The laundry room turned into a spare corner of a beauty shop. The corner turned into a chair. The chair turned into a rented space of my own. I kept my father's voice close. I used it like fuel. Every time I heard him sneer in my head, "You're nothing without me," I snipped a little cleaner, stood a little taller, saved a little more. By 23, I had my own studio, 4 chairs, a wall of mirrors, soft yellow light that made everyone's skin glow. My name, Liana's Studio, painted on the frosted glass door. My own key. My own lock. I thought of him less and less. I didn't answer his calls. I didn't look back. Until the day he did something I never imagined he would do. He called, and instead of yelling, instead of barking orders, he asked. "Liana," he said. His voice was hoarse, smaller somehow. "I need your help. I need to borrow some money." And just like that, the little girl inside me sat up straight. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She smiled. Because the man who said I was nothing was about to owe me everything. I still remember how his voice sounded that first time, thin and rasped at the edges, like an old radio signal crackling through static. It took me a few seconds to believe it was him at all. I'd just finished sweeping the last strands of hair off the studio floor, locking up alone after my last evening client. I almost didn't answer when I saw his name flash on my phone. Vadim, father. I hadn't changed the contact. Maybe I should have. "Liana," he said again when I didn't speak right away. He cleared his throat like he wanted to swallow his pride, but it got stuck. It's me. How are you?" I looked around my studio, my chairs neatly draped with clean white capes, the faint smell of hairspray still clinging to the air, the soft hum of the fridge in the back where I kept bottled water for clients. Everything here was mine. Paid for with hands that smelled of shampoo and bleach and sweat. "I'm fine," I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me more than hearing him. That's good. That's good." He paused. I could hear the TV in the background on his end, some old sitcom rerun, laugh track echoing into the silence between us. "Listen, Liana. I wouldn't call you if I didn't have to, you know that, right?" I didn't answer. Let him talk. "It's just, work's been slow. The site shut down, the boss skipped town, and... well, I need a little help. Just a bit to get through the month. I'll pay you back, of course. You're doing well now, right?" He said it carefully, testing the words like they might explode in his mouth. I could almost see him, sitting in his old armchair, the one I'd curled up in as a kid when he let me watch cartoons on Sundays. The cracked leather under his elbows, the bottle of cheap vodka probably sweating on the table beside him. "How much?" I asked. I kept my voice neutral, like I was asking a supplier for an invoice. He seemed startled that I didn't say no. Well, not much. Just 30,000. Rubles, I mean. Just to pay some bills, get food, you know. 30,000 wasn't nothing, not for me back then, but it wouldn't break me either. A few extra color jobs, an extra wedding client, and I'd make it back in a week or two. He must have known that. He must have been watching, listening, maybe through old neighbors, maybe through gossip. He knew I wouldn't be sleeping in a borrowed closet anymore. "All right," I said. He exhaled so hard I heard it through the line. "Thank you, Liana. Really, thank you. You know your old man wouldn't ask if. But you'll sign a paper," I cut in. Silence. The TV laugh track filled the gap, a ghostly cackle behind him. "A paper," he repeated, like the word tasted foreign. "A receipt. A loan agreement. 30,000 rubles, 10% interest per month until it's repaid. We both sign it. You'll bring your passport. I'll have it notarized." The laugh track ended. His silence got heavier, almost oily. "You want me to sign a contract? With my own daughter?" I leaned my hip against my studio door, looking at my reflection in the glass. I looked tired, but my eyes were clear. "Yes," I said. "I do." He didn't yell. That surprised me. He didn't call me ungrateful or stupid. He just made this low, dry chuckle that sounded more like a cough. "You've grown teeth, huh? Fine. If that's what you want. Anything else, my little banker?" I flinched, but only inside. "Bring it tomorrow. 7 p.m. Here." I gave him my address, the studio, not my flat. He repeated it back, voice flat. See you then, he said. No goodbye. No love you. I didn't expect either. I ended the call and slid my phone into my pocket. My hands were shaking now that he couldn't hear them. But it wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something else. Something sharp and cold and alive. When I locked the studio door behind me and stepped out into the night, the city lights glittered like the promise of every step I'd taken away from him. The air smelled like rain and car exhaust and freedom. The next day, I printed out the agreement myself. I googled the wording, loan contract. 30,000 rub. 10% interest per month. Repayment in full within 6 months. Collateral, none. I found a local notary who charged me $2,000 to stamp it. I paid it without blinking. At 6:55 p.m. the next evening, I was sitting at my studio's front desk, the contract neatly laid out, a pen next to it, and my father's name typed in block letters at the bottom. I told myself I wouldn't feel anything when I saw him again. But when the door swung open, and he stepped in, older, smaller, shoulders hunched in a jacket that used to look too big on me when I'd wear it to take out the trash, I felt something. Not pity. Not guilt. Just the strange weight of time folding itself in half. He didn't look at my mirrors. Didn't comment on the flowers by the reception or the fresh coat of cream paint I'd chosen for the walls. His eyes flicked to the paper, then to me. You really want me to sign this? He asked, voice low. I pushed the pen toward him. Yes. He sat. Picked up the pen. His hands looked rougher than I remembered, knuckles cracked. He signed. I signed. The notary, a young guy in a rumpled blazer, stamped it with a dull thunk. When it was done, Vadim slipped the money I'd prepared, an envelope of crisp bills, into his coat pocket. He didn't thank me. Just nodded once. At the door, he paused. Looked back at me, like maybe he was about to say something fatherly. Something soft. But all he said was, "You always were stubborn, Liana." Then he left. The bell above the door gingled softly after him, like a laugh I didn't have to hear anymore. And I sat alone in my studio, the contract still warm from the stamp, and wondered how many times I'd replay this moment in my mind, the moment the king of my little prison turned into my debtor. And I knew, in the deepest part of me, that this was only the beginning. After he left, I sat alone for a long time at the reception desk, listening to the faint hum of the overhead lights. The contract lay in front of me, a simple piece of paper that weighed more than all the years I'd carried his voice inside my head. It wasn't about the money. 30,000 rubles, I'd made that cutting the hair of 3 brides and their mothers in a single weekend. It wasn't even about the interest. It was about seeing his name under mine, inked in his scratchy, uneven hand. It was about proof that the balance had shifted. The next day, I slipped the notarized copy into a folder and placed it in my desk drawer, right under my lease and the tax papers for the studio. Sometimes, in the weeks that followed, I'd open that drawer just to look at it. The neat stamp, the signatures, the interest clause in black and white. My father didn't call. He didn't drop by. I heard about him, though. The neighborhood talks. Word spreads. He's working odd jobs now, paint, drywall, whatever he can find. He sold the old car. Walks to the corner store now. Bad back, they say. Drinks more than he used to. Sometimes, clients who knew him would look around my studio and say, "Liana, your father must be proud. You've done well for yourself." And I'd smile, and not bother explaining that pride wasn't something Vadim handed out. Pride was something you bought from him, and he always overcharged. Business at the studio was steady. I took on 2 young girls as assistants, Kira and Masha. Kira was 19, quick with foils and gossip. Masha was 21, quiet but precise, good with the older clients who wanted gentle hands. They called me boss when they thought I wasn't listening. Sometimes I heard Kira whisper to new clients, "Liana's the best in this district. You won't find better." I liked that. I liked how the word boss fit me now. The loan deadline came and went quietly at first. The contract said 6 months. By month 5, I still hadn't heard from him. I knew he wouldn't pay on time. I told myself I wouldn't care. But each day that passed made the signature in my drawer glow brighter, a small fire I'd lit and now had to feed. One night, after closing up, I found myself standing outside his building. The same blocky apartment where I'd grown up. Nothing had changed. The cracked walkway. The smell of old frying oil drifting from someone's open window. The flicker of a broken street lamp buzzing overhead. I didn't go inside. I didn't want to. I just stood there for a while, hands buried deep in my coat pockets. I imagined him sitting at that table, the same one I'd used to do homework on while he shouted at the TV. I wondered if he'd hidden the envelope under his mattress or spent it all on cheap vodka and cigarettes. When I got back to my flat, my real home, clean and bright and smelling faintly of lavender oil and hair dye, I pulled out the contract. I sat at my kitchen table, laid the paper flat, and ran my finger over the dates. 6 months. 30,000 plus 10% per month. He owed me 48,000 by now. The next morning, I called him. He didn't pick up. I called again the day after. And the day after that. Finally, on the 4th ring, he answered. What, he said. No hello. No surprise. You know why I'm calling, I said. I kept my voice calm. Even. Just business. A pause. I heard him exhale. Maybe lighting a cigarette. I don't have it yet, he said. You'll get it when I have it. That's not how this works, I said. There's interest. It's in the contract. 48,000 now. Next month, more. A soft, humorless laugh. You think you're so clever with your papers. You think this makes you better than me? No, I said. And I meant it. It just makes you my debtor. He laughed again. It wasn't like the old laugh that made the walls vibrate and my bones shrink. This one was dry. Tired. You want it back so bad? Come get it. Take my old TV. Take my jacket. You want to take my blood too? I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Fine, he muttered. You'll get it. You'll get every damn ruble. Then he hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time. My reflection in the black screen stared back, a woman whose father owed her money, respect, silence. A woman who'd learned to collect interest on old debts. I didn't need the money, not really. But I needed him to pay. I needed him to feel what I'd felt every time I'd asked him for coins for the bus, or for lunch money, or new shoes. The smallness of it. The humiliation tucked inside the palm of a hand that had to open and beg. So I waited. I focused on my studio. I ran promotions for bridal season, put in extra hours training Kira and Masha. I went home at night to my flat, my locked door, my lavender sheets. And every time I brushed my hair before bed, I thought about how clean the cut would be when the debt was paid. 2 weeks later, I got a knock at the studio just before closing. It was Kira who peeked out first, then turned to me with wide eyes. Boss, there's a man here. Says he's your father. I told her to let him in. He stepped through the door like he was stepping into a church, looking around at the soft lights, the big mirrors, the row of neatly arranged products. He looked out of place. Smaller somehow, but still carrying that stale weight that used to press on my ribs like a hand. He didn't sit. He didn't ask to. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick wad of bills wrapped in an old rubber band. He dropped it on my reception desk. That's 48, he said. His voice was low, hoarse. You want to count it? I didn't. I didn't need to. Thank you, I said. Simple. Final. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes scanning my tidy little empire. The mirrors reflected him back at himself, over and over. No throne here. No kingdom left to rule. Just him. Just me. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something more. Then he didn't. He turned. He left. The bell above the door gingled after him, soft as a promise kept. And I stood there, the cash cold under my fingertips, thinking about how I'd learned to make every cut clean, not just hair, but the old strings that once tied me down. I didn't count the money until he was long gone. When the door closed behind him, I sat down behind my reception desk, unwrapped the brittle rubber band, and spread the bills out into neat stacks. The smell of them, old, a little sour with cigarette smoke, took me back for a moment to being 15, holding out my hand for coins while he rummaged through his pocket, his fingers brushing my palm in a way that made me feel both owned and invisible at once. 48,000. I counted it twice. Not because I doubted him, but because I wanted the ritual of it. Each note a confession, a reversal, a proof. Kira lingered by the break room door, pretending to tidy up, but I knew she was watching me. She was young enough to still be curious about secrets. She'd seen enough in my eyes to know this was something bigger than just a debt. "Everything okay, boss?" she asked finally, when I flicked the last bill into place. "Everything's perfect," I said, and I meant it. I slipped the stacks into a plain white envelope, sealed it shut, and locked it in my drawer. I wouldn't spend it, not yet. Maybe not ever. It was never really about spending, anyway. I left the studio late that night, long after Kira and Masha had gone home. I turned off the lights one by one, listening to the soft click of the switches, the hum of silence growing thicker with each shadow that settled back into place. Outside, the city glowed the same as always, as neon signs buzzing, car tires hissing over wet asphalt, the world moving forward whether I moved with it or not. I walked home instead of calling a cab. It wasn't far, 15 minutes through back streets and old courtyards that smelled of damp concrete and someone's cooking. I passed the park where I used to sit on a squeaky swing as a kid, dragging my toes in the dirt, trying to push myself higher than the rusted top bar would allow. I passed the bus stop where I'd found the hairdressing flyer all those years ago. It wasn't there anymore, of course, just layers of new posters pasted over the old ghosts, cheap rooms for rent, lost cat, guitar lessons. I thought about him, Vadim, sitting alone in that apartment. I pictured him counting out each bill, fingers scraping through his small hoard, realizing there was no more magic pot to pull from. Wondering if he'd ever seen me as a person, or just a vessel for his legacy, his control, his story. At my flat, I unlocked my door, 3 locks, good ones, and stepped inside. My place smelled like eucalyptus and faint hairspray. The little studio corner I'd carved out for myself in my living room was still there, mannequin heads lined up on shelves, practice wigs, scissors laid out on a clean towel. I liked seeing them before bed, my quiet soldiers, my reminders. I made tea. Sat at my small kitchen table. Opened my notebook and wrote down the date, debt paid in full. A line through his name. No interest left to collect. The next morning at the studio, life went on exactly as before, as if nothing had shifted. But it had. Kira and Masha were laughing in the break room, sharing a stale pastry from the corner bakery. I stood at my big mirror at Station 2, cleaning my scissors, thinking about the next step. Because there always had to be a next step, or else what was all this for? I hadn't built this place just to prove something to a man who would never really see it. I'd built it to have something mine. But once you own something fully, the hunger doesn't vanish, it just sharpens. That week, I found myself daydreaming between clients. I'd stare at my reflection while mixing color, my face half shadowed by the ring light, and imagine another location. A bigger space. More chairs. Maybe a second branch closer to the city center where the rent was brutal but the walk-ins were steady, the brides richer. At night, I lay in bed scrolling through listings. Commercial spaces, lease terms, business loans. I didn't need Vadim's money, but I'd learned something useful from him. Never spend your own when you can use someone else's to build bigger. One rainy Tuesday, I met with my landlord. An old woman with tight hair and sharper eyes than most men twice her size. I asked if she'd heard about the empty shop 3 doors down, the one that used to be a florist's but had been dark for months. She raised an eyebrow at me over her tea. "You want more space already?" she asked, almost amused. "You're not tired of cleaning up other people's hair?" I smiled, polite. "It's not about the hair. It's about not having to say please to anyone ever again." She understood. Old women like her always do. She promised to call the owner. Within a week, I had a key to go see it myself, a long, narrow space with high ceilings and dusty tile floors that smelled like wilted roses and stale potpourri. I could already see it, mirrors all along the left wall, chairs spaced wider apart, soft gold lights, white counters, a waiting area with real plants instead of plastic ones. I ran my fingers along the chipped counter where bouquets used to stand, and I saw my future blooming through the cracks. When I locked up that empty shop and stepped back into the rain, my hair stuck to my cheeks, cold and damp. I stood there, smiling at the gray sky. Vadim's voice was gone, for once, completely silent in my head. He'd once told me that without his blood and money, I was nothing. But there I was, dripping rain onto the sidewalk, clutching a new set of keys. All mine. The next few weeks passed in a haze of details, paperwork, measurements, paint samples, loan applications, late nights staring at spreadsheets until the lines blurred into static. But it was my kind of chaos, the kind I could hold in my hands, bend to my will, sweep up like stray hair on the studio floor. Kira and Masha knew something was up before I said a word. They watched me pace between clients, flipping through catalogs of chairs and lighting fixtures, tapping my pen on the counter while pretending to check bookings. One evening, when the last client had just left and the sign on the door flipped to closed, Kira cornered me by the sink where I was rinsing dye bowls. "You're moving?" she blurted, like she'd been holding the question in her mouth for days. "No," I said, rinsing a stubborn streak of red from the porcelain. "Expanding." She blinked. "Another studio?" I turned off the tap and faced her. She looked so young under the harsh ceiling light, eyes wide, hair pinned up in messy clips, fingertips stained with a faint smear of toner. I saw myself in her for half a breath, the girl sweeping floors for tips, all questions and hidden dreams. "Yes," I said. "Another studio. Bigger. Better location. More chairs. More hands." She let out a low whistle. "You'll need more stylists." "I will," I agreed. "And maybe a junior manager to help me run this one while I set up the new place." Her eyes snapped up to mine, hope bright and raw. I didn't say it outright, not yet, but she saw it there. The possibility. The small door opening where she could step through, if she wanted it badly enough. After she left that night, I sat alone in the back room and scribbled numbers on a scrap of receipt paper. Rent. Renovations. Equipment. Salaries. Advertising. It all added up to more than I had on hand, even with Vadim's money, even with my savings. But that was fine. I'd learned what a signature could do, how a piece of paper could bind someone to a promise. This time, the banks would sign for me. This time, the interest wouldn't burn, it would grow. The next morning, I booked a meeting with a loan officer at a mid-sized local bank. I put on my best black blazer, the one that made my shoulders look broader, my waist sharper, and gathered every file I could think of, tax returns, lease agreements, my studio's monthly revenue sheets, photos of my work. Proof. Proof that I was not a risk, but an investment. The loan officer, a man named Pavel with neat hair and a watch that looked more expensive than my entire wardrobe, leafed through my folder in silence for 10 minutes while I sat across from him, back straight, hands folded on my knee. Finally, he looked up at me over the rim of his glasses. "You run this place alone?" "I have 2 assistants," I said. "But the business is mine. All the licenses, all the clients, all the bills, mine." He raised an eyebrow, tapped my revenue sheet. "Good numbers for a small shop. Why expand? You're doing fine here." "Fine isn't enough," I said. I held his gaze, didn't blink. "Clients are waiting weeks for appointments. We're turning people away. I want a bigger space, more chairs, walk-in traffic. I want to build the best salon in this district, maybe this city." He studied me for a moment longer, then cracked a small, professional smile. "Ambitious." I didn't smile back. "Necessary." In the end, the numbers spoke louder than I did. He said he'd call me in a week. I thanked him, shook his hand firmly, and left the bank with my shoulders square. Back at the studio, I didn't say anything to the girls. No point speaking a promise before it was sealed. But that night, when I closed up, I stood alone in the darkened reception area for a while, my fingers trailing over the backs of the chairs, the cold chrome of the sink. I thought about how small this place had once felt, my first tiny kingdom, scraped together with free samples and second-hand mirrors. Now it felt like a stepping stone, sturdy enough to stand on while I reached for more. At home, I opened the envelope with Vadim's repayment. I counted it again, then placed it in a fresh envelope marked New Studio Fund. Not a single ruble would be wasted. Days passed. Clients came and went. Roots were retouched, fringes trimmed, wedding hair pinned into glossy crowns. Each head was another brick in the foundation I was laying. A week later, the bank called. Pavel's voice was smooth and casual, but there was a smile in it I could hear through the phone. Congratulations, Ms. Liana. The loan is approved. Come by to sign the final paperwork. I thanked him, polite but sharp-edged. I didn't let the relief show in my voice, but when I hung up, I pressed my palm flat against the kitchen table and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That night, I didn't dream of Vadim. I didn't dream of old rooms with peeling wallpaper or slammed doors or voices seeping through thin walls. I dreamed of mirrors, long rows of them, each one catching the light, reflecting back not what I'd escaped, but what I'd built with my own 2 hands. And in the dream, I wasn't small at all. The next morning, I arrived at the bank 15 minutes early. Pavel met me in the lobby, all smiles and small talk, polite compliments about my studio, my business plan, my remarkable progress for someone so young. I answered each line with the same polite smile, but inside I was counting every word like loose change. I knew what he saw when he looked at me, a tidy little success story, local girl done good. Maybe he imagined my father in the background somewhere, an old man beaming proudly from behind a fence he'd paid to build. He didn't know the truth, of course. The truth was folded neatly into my handbag, a loan agreement, a notarized promise that no one had given me anything for free. When he handed me the pen to sign the bank papers, my hand didn't tremble. I read every line, every percentage point, every repayment schedule. This time the interest was mine to wield, a tool, not a threat. Pavel talked about future expansions, possible partnerships, marketing campaigns. I nodded at all the right moments. But in my mind, I was already standing inside the dusty old flower shop down the street, stripping the wilted rose scent from its walls, replacing it with the clean perfume of shampoo and fresh dye. When the final signature was done, Pavel leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the folder. You've built something strong, Liana. Not everyone does that. I met his gaze squarely. I didn't have a choice, I said. He laughed, a soft, polite banker's laugh, not understanding at all. Then he stood and offered his hand. The handshake was warm and firm. For him, this was just another client. For me, it was another pair of shears, sharper, bigger, better. When I stepped out of the bank, the sun was too bright for my eyes. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching people hurry past me, arms full of shopping bags, phones pressed to their ears, lives heavy with errands. No one looked at me twice. Good. Let them pass. Let them keep rushing while I stayed still, solid, unafraid. I walked straight to the old flower shop. The landlord was waiting for me, a thin, sour-faced man named Igor who'd inherited the place from an aunt and didn't care what bloomed inside it as long as the rent arrived on time. We walked the narrow rooms together, Igor muttering about the plumbing, the faulty light fixtures, the cracked tiles. I pretended to listen, but my mind was painting over everything, soft cream walls, gold-accented mirrors, black leather chairs lined up like thrones. A front desk made of pale wood, clean and simple. A sign on the glass door with my name in bold letters, Liana's Studio, City Branch. I signed that lease right there, standing at the dusty counter where brides once ordered bouquets and old men bought carnations for name days they'd nearly forgotten. I signed my name so cleanly the ink hardly had time to dry. Igor gave me the keys, 3 tarnished metal teeth on a bent ring. They jingled in my pocket all the way back to my studio. Kira and Masha were hunched over the appointment book when I walked in. I didn't say anything at first, I just stood in the doorway, watching them whisper over the pages, arguing good-naturedly about whether to squeeze in another wedding trial on Saturday. When they noticed me, they both straightened up, eyes bright. I pulled the keys from my pocket and dropped them on the counter between them. What's that? Masha asked, but I could see she already knew. The new shop, I said simply. We open in 3 months. If the paint dries on time. Kira squealed, an unprofessional, delighted noise that bounced off the mirrors and made me laugh despite myself. Masha, calmer, just smiled, a slow, warm curve of her mouth that said more than any words. Will you take both of us, she asked. You'll help run this one, I told her. I'll need you here to keep it steady while I set up the new place. Kira can choose, train new girls there or stay here with you. Up to her. Kira practically jumped over the counter to hug me, arms tied around my shoulders, her hair smelling of cheap vanilla body spray and fresh dye. I let her hold me, just for a moment, feeling how different this embrace was from the ones I'd never really had, the father's pat on the shoulder that turned into a shove, the weight of an arm that felt more like a chain. This was lighter. This was mine. That evening, when they left and the studio fell quiet again, I stayed late with my notebook open on the reception desk. I made lists as equipment to buy, painters to hire, ads to run. I drafted new job posts for stylists. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote one word at the top, rules. Because if Vadim had taught me anything, it was that a house without rules rots from the inside. Mine would not rot. No gossip that festered into poison. No hands that stole from the till. No one would whisper she's too soft when my back was turned. When I was done, I slipped the notebook into my bag, locked the studio, and stepped outside. The street was dark but alive, neon signs blinking, cars rumbling by, the city's pulse steady and indifferent. In that moment, I realized I hadn't thought about Vadim in days. Not his debt. Not his voice. Not even his disappointment, because there was nothing left for him to take back. The balance was clean. The contract was paid. The only blood and money in this story now was mine, and I would spend both exactly as I pleased. The next morning I woke before dawn, the city outside my window still muted and blue in the early light. I lay there a moment, staring at the ceiling of my tidy bedroom, pale walls, clean lines, no shadows clinging to the corners. I listened for echoes of his voice, the sharp bark of my name, the hiss of disappointment, but there was nothing. Just my own breathing, steady and alone. I made coffee in my little kitchen and drank it slowly, standing barefoot by the window. Below, the street lights flickered off one by one. I thought about the old flat where I'd grown up, the flickering hallway light, the smell of stale cigarettes and burned soup. I wondered if Vadim was awake yet, hunched over his chipped table, wondering where to find his next favor. But the thought drifted through me like smoke and vanished. I had other things to carry now. By 7, I was at the new shop, keys cold in my palm, the stale smell of dead roses and dust seeping into my hair. I stood in the middle of the empty space, high ceiling, cracked floor tiles, faded floral wallpaper half peeled by damp. I could feel the bones of it under the rot, like running my fingers over a client's hair and finding the clean line that would set it all free. I called painters first, 2 brothers with sharp eyes and steady hands. They measured walls, argued about primer, promised me 2 weeks if the plaster behaved. Then the electrician, a grizzled old man with hands as big as dinner plates who whistled when he saw the breaker box. He muttered something about bad wiring, but he took my deposit without blinking. By noon, I had fabric samples spread out across the old florist counter, velvet for the waiting chairs, faux leather for the stylist seats, soft gold curtains to soften the big front window. I sketched the new sign on the back of an invoice, Liana's Studio, City Branch. No phone number. No tagline. Just my name. Enough. When the work crews left for the day, I stayed behind. I swept the dust and plaster flakes into neat piles, bagged them up myself. I washed my hands in the tiny cracked sink in the back room, scrubbing old flower pollen and fresh paint off my knuckles until the skin stung. I thought about calling my father then, just to tell him where I was standing, what I was building. I imagined the conversation, him on the other end, silence blooming like mold between us. Would he ask me for a job? Would he remind me, one more time, that it was his blood that ran through my veins? I didn't call. Some debts are best left unpaid. The next weeks turned into a rhythm, my old studio by day, the new shop by night. Kira took over more appointments. Masha ran the books when I couldn't be there. Some evenings I found them together in the break room, heads bent over the schedule, bickering about who could handle which wedding party. I let them argue. It was good for them, good for me too. Loyal hands, quick eyes. At the new shop, the painters laid down fresh cream coats that smelled like clean beginnings. The old floral wallpaper vanished under new walls smooth as silk. I chose big round mirrors framed in brushed gold. I ordered soft pendant lights that would make every client glow. Once, late at night, I sat alone on the floor under the new mirrors, back pressed against the fresh paint, legs stretched out across the tiles. I thought about how small my world had once been, a single room, a single door I couldn't lock, a single voice telling me I would never survive without him. And now, the locks were mine. The voice was gone. The keys jingled like coins in my pocket, paid for in long hours and neat contracts and hair swept into tidy piles. One Friday night, I stayed at the new shop past midnight, waiting for the last delivery, the new styling chairs, black and sleek and heavy enough to anchor a woman's kingdom. The delivery boys grumbled about the stairs, but I watched them bring in each chair like treasure. When they were gone, I unwrapped the plastic from one of them, ran my fingers over the cold metal base, the smooth leather seat. I sat down, just for a moment, turning the chair slowly to see my reflection in the mirror, not a client, but the owner. The boss. The woman no one could claim. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a second, my heart stuttered, the old reflex, is it him? But it was Kira, texting a photo of tomorrow's appointment book, covered in scribbles and hearts. Don't forget you have Lena's wedding hair at 9. I left your favorite clips on station 2. Sleep, boss. I smiled, a real smile, wide enough to hurt. I texted back a simple thank you and tucked my phone away. I stayed there a while longer, perched in my new chair, spinning slow circles under the soft hum of the unfinished ceiling lights. I imagined the place full of clients laughing, scissors snipping, dryers humming like busy bees. I imagined the door opening, Vadim stepping in, older, smaller than ever. Seeing my name on the glass. Realizing it wasn't his anymore. I didn't wish for it. I didn't need it. The debt was settled. His power was spent. When I finally locked up, the night outside was cool and sharp, the city breathing slow around me. I turned the keys in my pocket like worry stones. I didn't think of him as I walked home, not really. I thought about fresh paint drying smooth, scissors gleaming under new lights, my name catching the sun on the front door come morning. No father's blessing. No borrowed blood. Just me, and every clean cut I'd made to get here. The grand opening came faster than I expected, days folding into each other like pages I couldn't stop turning. It felt like one moment I was sketching the sign in the margin of an invoice, and the next I was standing in front of the new glass door, peeling off the protective film while Kira bounced at my shoulder, snapping photos for the studio's social media. The sign gleamed under the morning sun, Liana's Studio, City Branch. No father's name. No husband's name. Mine alone, clean and simple. We opened on a Saturday. It was still early spring, that awkward season when the streets were streaked with the last dirty snow, but the air smelled of thaw and restless things. The old florist smell was gone, replaced by fresh paint, the faint chemical sweetness of dye, the hush of new mirrors waiting to catch a stranger's face and send them back out brighter than they arrived. My old regulars came first, loyal women from my first studio, curious to see what I'd built. Kira flitted from chair to chair like a restless bird, gossiping with new walk-ins, boasting about our special opening prices, handing out little branded combs like candy. Masha stayed at the old place, managing the regular flow of weddings and route touch-ups. Every few hours she'd text me photos, the appointment book, the cash drawer, a quick selfie of her and the last bride of the day, both of them beaming under the halo of the mirror light. When the last client left that evening, hair pinned into a fresh, bouncy blowout, cheeks pink from the praise of strangers, I stood alone at the reception desk and counted the day's takings. I didn't really need to. It wasn't about the money, not yet. It was about the proof that the doors had opened, the chairs had turned, the mirrors had reflected. I locked up alone. The new keys felt heavier than the old ones, sharp teeth, bright brass, still clean from the locksmith's file. I turned them in the lock and felt the quiet click echo in my bones. That night, back at my flat, I lay awake longer than I should have. Not from worry, I was too tired for that, but from something sharper and sweeter, an edge that buzzed through my veins like caffeine. I'd once lain awake under my father's roof, counting cracks in the ceiling, listening for his footstep, bracing for the creak of the floorboards and the slurred bark of my name through the thin walls. Now the silence was mine alone, clean, undisturbed, a hush that smelled faintly of lavender oil and warm towels. I didn't need to brace for anything. A few weeks later, I found myself back in my first studio on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Kira was at the city branch training 2 new stylists, and Masha had stepped out to grab lunch. I sat at my old station, Station 2, the first chair I'd bought with my own tips and free haircuts. The mirrors were a little older now, the corners dulled by fingerprints in time, but they still reflected me exactly as I was, sharper, steadier, unafraid. The door opened with a soft chime. I didn't look up at first, I was scribbling notes for an ad campaign, marking out days for the bridal season rush. It wasn't until I caught the faint smell of stale tobacco that I knew. Vadim stood just inside the door, shoulders hunched, cap pulled low over his brow. He looked thinner, like something had been gnawed out of him from the inside. The sight didn't sting, not anymore. Liana, he said. My name still fit in his mouth like a challenge. I closed my notebook calmly, set my pen down. What do you want? I asked. No softness. No heat. Just business. He took a step closer, eyes flicking to the empty chairs, the fresh cape draped over Station 1. Maybe he was seeing ghosts, the girl sweeping floors for free, the girl wrapping scraps of leftover dye in foil, the girl slipping out with her life packed into garbage bags while he worked late. You look different, he said finally, like he was talking to the room, not to me. Taller. This place, it looks good. I waited. He shuffled closer, hands buried deep in the pockets of his old windbreaker. I wondered if he'd come to ask for another loan. If he had, he'd walk out with nothing but the echo of his own voice. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, battered envelope, yellowed at the corners, greasy from too many days in a coat that hadn't been washed in months. He set it on my station. What's this? I asked, not touching it. A gift, he said. His voice cracked, not dramatic, not theatrical. Just old. Tired. I sold the old tools. Some scrap metal. The TV. I didn't know what else to do with it. It's not much. I stared at the envelope like it might bite me. He cleared his throat, not meeting my eyes. You don't need it, I know. But I owed you more than what I signed for. He said it like the words were stuck in his teeth, raw and bleeding. Take it or don't. I don't care. I didn't reach for it. I didn't promise to use it. I didn't promise anything. You taught me something, I said instead, my voice flat and clean in the mirror's reflection. You taught me to make people sign for what they owe. He flinched, just barely, a ripple through his shoulders. Do you want me to sign something now? He asked, bitter and cracked at the edges. I met his eyes in the glass. No, I said. We're done. He nodded once, stiff, a broken hinge creaking shut. Then he turned and walked out, the door chime ringing like a tiny bell of final rites. When the sound faded, I opened the envelope, small bills, a few crumpled coins. Not even enough to buy new towels for the back room. But I didn't toss it. I slipped it into my desk drawer, under the folder with the old contract, sealed and stamped, a record of a debt settled twice over. Outside, I heard Masha's laugh in the corridor as she returned from lunch, carrying plastic bags that rustled like spring rain. I closed the drawer and turned to greet her. Behind me, the mirror caught my reflection, and only mine. No ghost standing behind my shoulder, no voice murmuring about who I'd be without him. Just me. Just the kingdom I'd carved from strands of hair, patience, and a promise to myself. And a clean door he'd never hold shut again. Spring bled into summer in a rush of wedding parties and prom appointments. The new studio's mirrors filled up so fast that some evenings I'd stand at the reception desk and just watch the chairs turn, heads dipped under foils, blow dryers humming, Kira's laughter floating from one end of the room to the other like the warm draft of a hairdryer itself. At the old studio, Masha ran things so smoothly I almost felt like a ghost there, a figure drifting in and out to sign the invoices, sweep a stray pile of hair, nod politely at familiar faces who no longer needed me to touch their heads to trust me. In the city branch, I stayed busy. I cut, colored, styled until my fingers ached. I trained the new girls, Lena, sharp-eyed and quick with an updo, Alina, quiet but with hands so gentle older clients fell in love with her. I let them watch me work, let them hold the mirror at the right angle while I pinned a bride's hair so tight that no summer wind could undo it. Clients loved the new shop. They said the big mirrors made them feel expensive, that the warm lights made them beautiful before I ever lifted a pair of scissors. Some of them whispered that I was different, patient, precise, always listening, never smiling too wide. They didn't know what it cost to keep my hands steady, my voice soft, my eyes dry when I found an old ghost behind their reflections for just a second too long. Some nights, after closing, I'd sit alone at the city branch's reception desk. I'd run my palm over the smooth wood, flip through the pages of the appointment book, look at my own name scribbled over column after column. And sometimes, rarely, I'd remember that battered envelope Vadim left behind. I never touched the money. I never spent it. I let it sit in my old desk drawer like an insect pressed between glass. Dead, but proof. I saw him once more that summer, not inside my studio, but across the street. I was locking up the old place, keys dangling from my fingers, half my hair pinned back with the same silver clips I'd bought when I was still renting my first chair by the hour. I glanced up, and there he was, standing by the bus stop, a plastic bag hanging from his wrist like a limp flag. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just watched me as I turned the key, tested the lock, tucked the ring of brass back into my pocket. I met his eyes across the road, pale, watery, the whites gone dull with age and cheap drink. For a heartbeat I wondered if he'd cross over. If he'd shuffle up to me and mumble something about how proud he was, how sorry he wasn't, how little he had left. But he didn't. The bus came. He got on. The door hissed shut behind him like an exhale I didn't need to hold anymore. That night, I lay awake in my neat little flat, the windows cracked to let in the hush of the city's summer air, soft, humid, smelling faintly of cut grass and warm asphalt. I thought about how long it had taken for his voice to shrink to a whisper inside my head, then finally fall silent altogether. In the morning, I got up early, made coffee, braided my hair tight against the back of my neck, and went back to the city branch. When I unlocked the door, the place smelled exactly right, faint hints of hairspray, shampoo, fresh paint that hadn't quite lost its edge. The big mirrors were waiting, catching the soft dawn light like the promise of another clean day. Kira came in first, still blinking sleep from her eyes, a paper cup of cheap coffee clutched between her painted nails. She grinned at me, kicked off her shoes at the back, and got straight to setting out the clean capes. By 10, the first bride of the day was in my chair, a girl with fine, pale hair and trembling hands. She told me she was afraid her veil would slip, that her curls would fall, that her new husband wouldn't like the shape of her face under the bright lights of the registry hall. I brushed her hair back gently, smoothed a hand along her crown, felt the shape of her skull under my fingers like a map. I thought of my own head, bent so many times under hands that didn't know gentleness. "You'll be perfect," I said, and I meant it. I meant it with all the force of every clean cut I'd ever made for myself. When I pinned her hair up, I made it so tight no wind could shift it. No rain could pull it down. And when she turned to look at herself in the mirror, she didn't see me at all, she only saw her own face, bright and new and unafraid. When she left, Kira caught my eye in the reflection. "You're going to stay late again tonight?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Probably," I said. I smiled at her. "Go home when you're done. Leave the keys with me." She didn't argue. She knew the quiet at the end of the day was mine alone. The hum of the empty shop, the faint scent of hairspray that clung to the air long after the last bride stepped out. Later, when the last blow-dryer fell silent and the last snip of the shears faded into the walls, I sat at my reception desk again. The mirrors caught me at every angle, a kingdom of reflections, each one more real than the one before. I didn't see Vadim behind me anymore. Just the soft glow of the lights. The clean lines of my own shoulders. The hands that had learned to wield blades without trembling. Outside, the summer city breathed slow and warm through the glass. I could almost hear the echo of the old story, "You're nothing without me," but it faded before it could land. Because this was mine now. All of it. Paid for in hair and hours, and every door I'd ever locked behind me for good. By midsummer, the city branch was no longer just an idea or a risk, it was alive. Breathing. Turning profit faster than I'd planned. Clients came in waves, some from the old neighborhood, some pulled in by word of mouth, or the clean glow of our new sign catching sunlight at the perfect angle. I started to think bigger, and it didn't scare me the way it used to. I found myself lingering by the big windows between clients, my eyes drifting to the busy street, imagining a third branch, a bridal specialist studio maybe, or a training academy. Somewhere girls like Kira and Masha could pass on what they'd learned at my side, the patience, the sharpness, the small secrets that made our scissors more than blades. One Friday night in late July, after the last client had left and the studio was humming with that soft, satisfying silence that always follows a busy day, I sat at my desk and opened the old folder, the one I kept in the bottom drawer, behind invoices and lease agreements. Inside, the original contract with Vadim was still there, folded neatly along the same creases. Beneath it sat the small, battered envelope he'd brought me the second time, the half-hearted repayment, the scrap metal money. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even counted it since that day. For a moment, I wondered why I still kept it. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't nostalgia. It was proof, not for anyone else, but for me. A reminder that power shifts when you hold your ground. That blood doesn't bind if you refuse to let it choke you. I took out the envelope and laid it on the counter under the bright mirror lights. The bills looked even smaller now, a ghost currency, almost laughable next to the day's register, the neat stacks of receipts from the city branch humming profit under my fingertips. Part of me wanted to throw it out. Burn it, maybe. But another part, the part that once swept hair for free in someone else's studio, the part that used to slip coins into her pocket and count them like borrowed air, knew better. Some debts should stay visible. A trophy in reverse. I tucked the envelope back into the folder, slid it under the more important papers, the new loan contract for the third location I'd been quietly preparing. Yes, I'd started that too. A space 2 districts over, closer to the train station, where wedding parties rolled through every weekend like flocks of restless birds. I didn't tell Kira or Masha yet. I wanted the lease in my hand first. The keys warm against my palm. That weekend, I took a rare Sunday off, half a day, really, but enough to remind myself I could stand still if I chose. I went to the old park where I'd once sat on squeaky swings, dragging the soles of my shoes in the dirt to feel the drag of something solid under me. I sat on the same bench where my mother once left a forgotten scarf behind, a memory so distant it barely felt like mine. I wondered if she'd ever know what I'd built. If she'd care. I didn't resent her anymore. She'd run in the only direction she could see. I'd done the same, just slower, sharper, and with scissors in my hands instead of a packed suitcase. I stayed there until the street lamps flickered on, my fingers brushing splinters from the worn bench. The air smelled of cut grass and warm pavement, the city humming in the distance. When I got home that night, my phone buzzed to Kira, sending me photos of the fresh foils she'd done on a last-minute walk-in, crowing about how the client tipped her double. Masha texted a single thumbs up from the old shop, quiet today. Don't worry. We're fine. They didn't know I'd been sitting in that park with ghosts at my shoulder. They didn't need to. They only needed to know I'd come back Monday morning, keys in hand, ready to open the doors again. And I did. I signed the lease for the third location by the end of August, a squat, sunlit unit on the corner of a wide avenue, big glass windows and just enough room for 4 chairs and a back room for wedding gowns and coffee. I paid the deposit with money the banks trusted me to borrow. No signature from Vadim. No borrowed pride. No old blood binding my name to his. The landlord, a brisk woman named Marina with silver hair pulled tight at the nape of her neck, asked if I needed help finding staff. I just smiled and told her I had all the hands I needed. And I did. Kira would manage the city branch once the new stylists were trained. Masha would watch over the first studio, her quiet calm the spine of the place. Lena and Alina would follow me to the new shop, eager to cut bridal hair into shapes that wouldn't fall apart under wind, sweat, or promises whispered too quickly at the altar. On the first night I stood alone in the empty third space, I brought nothing but my scissors. I sat on the floor again, same as I'd done in the city branch, back pressed to the cold wall, knees up, fingers tracing the blades that had once been just a dream folded inside a bus flyer. I thought about the debt, the first one he'd given me, the second one he'd tried to return, the invisible one he'd carved into my skin every time he told me I'd never make it. Paid. Paid twice. Paid forever. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the city drift in through the empty window frame. No door yet, but soon. And when it swung open for the first time, it would be my name above it again. And the next one after that. And the next. All mine. No one else's blessing needed. The third studio opened on a crisp morning at the edge of autumn, the sky sharp and pale, the street outside busy with brides-to-be clutching garment bags, mothers fussing with pinned curls that hadn't held since the rehearsal dinner. It smelled new, fresh paint, fresh furniture, fresh mirrors so clean they almost startled you with the truth of your own reflection. The old scent of stale roses and cheap cigarettes was nowhere near these walls. Only the faint sweetness of shampoo and the warm hum of blow dryers waiting to wake up. Lena and Alina stood by the front desk, wide-eyed, bright-cheeked, their hair pulled back tight the way I'd taught them, clean lines, no strands in your eyes when you're working. They'd grown fast under my hands, steady with color bowls, quick with bobby pins. They'd learned the same way I had, by watching, by doing, by making mistakes they never made twice. When the first bride stepped through the door, hair long, eyes wide, Clutching her phone with trembling fingers, I greeted her myself. I wrapped the black cape around her shoulders, tilted her chin up under the soft pendant light, and found her face in the mirror the way I always did, gently, as if coaxing a shape from stone. "It'll hold all day," I promised, and I meant it. And when she smiled at her reflection, I smiled too, just a small thing, private, invisible in the warm hum of the new shop. I didn't tell her about the old contracts folded away in my drawer. I didn't tell her about my father's voice ringing in my skull for years, the stale taste of fear in my mouth every time I touched a doorknob that wasn't mine. She didn't need that story. She only needed to know her hair would not fall apart, not under wind, or tears, or a too-late cab on a cold street corner. In the evenings, when the last curl was pinned, the last veil set, the final sweep of stray hair gathered from the bright floor, I stayed behind like I always did. I counted the days register, not because I needed to, but because the ritual reminded me, this was mine. Every ruble earned clean. Every snip, every swipe of color, every soft word to a bride who left braver than she arrived. Sometimes Kira called from the city branch, breathless, half shouting over the hum of hairdryers and chattering clients. She told me about new walk-ins, about the stylists she was training, about how someone asked if we'd ever open on the other side of town. "Maybe we should," I told her once, half a laugh in my throat. "Boss, you'll never sleep," she teased back. "Who needs sleep?" I said, and meant it. Because this was the dream I hadn't dared shape when I was 17, folding that flyer into my pocket on the bus, ears ringing with his voice telling me I'd be nothing without his name, his blood, his money. He'd been right in one way, blood and money made people kneel. But not me. Not anymore. I didn't hear from Vadim after that last meeting. The last I knew, through whispers, through a neighbor's careless word, he'd moved to a smaller flat out past the bus depot. He still drank. He still barked his stories in the courtyard to anyone who'd listen. I suppose he still said my name sometimes, sour on his tongue like old vinegar. But the door between us was locked for good. And every key I carried on my ring reminded me, I only open the doors I choose. Winter came early that year. By December, all 3 studios were booked solid through the holidays, roots to touch up before New Year's Eve, office parties, fresh cuts for fresh starts. Clients brought gifts, chocolates, flowers, fancy soap wrapped in silver ribbon. Kira kept the best ones on the city branch's reception counter, a bright little shrine to what we'd built. Sometimes, standing in the back room stacking supply orders or fixing a crooked mirror, I caught myself wondering, what next? Another branch? A training school? A product line with my name, Liana's, stamped on tiny bottles lined up in neat rows? The dream was never just about scissors. Or money. Or the perfect blowout that would hold all night. It was about having a place where no voice could thunder through thin walls and tell me who I was supposed to be. Now, when I lock up each night, whether it's the old studio with its faded floors and soft ghosts, the city branch with its wide mirrors and buzzing walk-ins, or the new place that still smells faintly of paint and ambition, I feel it in my bones. Every lock clicks shut behind me like a quiet promise, I am not his anymore. Sometimes I stand in front of the glass door when the lights are off, and I see myself reflected 100 times over, behind me, beside me, above me. All the versions of me that stayed, that ran, that built, that dared to hold the scissors a little tighter when my hands still shook. I never slam the door when I leave. I just close it. Gently. The click is enough. No debt left unpaid. No father left to fear. Just clean cuts, clean mirrors, clean keys heavy in my pocket. All mine. And always will be.